A young woman of 18 years walked through the polished doors of Ashford & Sons Fine Jewellers in the heart of London, wearing a simple woolen dress and carrying in her reticule the result of 6 months of careful saving. The proprietor and his assistant looked upon her with barely concealed disdain, not knowing they were about to humiliate the daughter of one of England's most powerful dukes. What would unfold in the next hour would transform an ordinary autumn afternoon in 1815 into a lesson that would echo through the halls of high society for years to come. But before we continue, please check if you are already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments where you are watching this video from. Lady Catherine Pemberton awakened before dawn on that crisp October morning in 1815, her heart filled with an unusual mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. Today marked the culmination of 6 months of careful planning and secret saving. Through the tall windows of her modest chambers in the servants' quarters of Pemberton House, she could see the first rays of sunlight painting the London sky in shades of gold and amber. Catherine had chosen to live simply, occupying rooms typically reserved for upper household staff, rather than the grand suites befitting her station as daughter of the Duke of Pemberton. This arrangement, though unusual, had been her own request upon turning 16. She wished to understand the lives of those who served her family, to learn the value of honest work and simple living. Her lady's maid, Mary, had been with the family since Catherine was a child, and was one of the few servants who knew the young woman's true identity. The others believed her to be a distant cousin of modest means, earning her keep by helping with correspondence and estate management. "Will you be needing the carriage today, miss?" Mary inquired, as she helped Catherine dress in her simplest gown of deep blue wool, practical and well made but without ornamentation. "No, Mary. I shall walk to Bond Street. The morning air will do me good, and I wish to arrive as any ordinary customer would." Catherine's voice carried a determination that Mary had come to recognize over the years. Catherine had been secretly setting aside small amounts from her personal allowance, money given to her for books and charitable donations. She had also sold several pieces of jewelry she had inherited from her late grandmother, items of sentimental rather than extraordinary value. Her goal was to purchase a wedding gift for her dear friend, Miss Eleanor Hartwell, the daughter of the local vicar, who was to marry a young curate in the coming month. The two young women had formed an unlikely but genuine friendship when Catherine, in her disguise as a cousin of modest means, had volunteered to help with the parish Sunday school. Eleanor knew nothing of Catherine's true identity, believing her to be exactly what she appeared, a well-educated but financially limited young woman with a generous heart and refined manners. "I do hope the jewellers will have something suitable," Catherine murmured, checking her appearance one final time in the small mirror. Her dark hair was arranged simply beneath a plain bonnet, and her hands, though soft, showed the slight calluses that came from her insistence on helping with household tasks. Catherine's mother had died when she was 12, and her father, the Duke, though loving, was often absent on matters of state and business. This had given Catherine unusual freedom to explore London and form relationships across social boundaries, always under the watchful but discreet eye of trusted servants. As she prepared to leave, Catherine touched the small leather purse hidden within her reticule. Inside were £23, 4 shillings and 6pence, a considerable sum for someone of her supposed station, but modest by the standards of Bond Street's finest establishments. Catherine stepped out into the crisp morning air, pulling her woolen shawl closer around her shoulders. The streets of Mayfair were already bustling with activity, as servants hurried about their early morning duties. Delivery boys carried fresh bread and milk, and the occasional gentleman rode past on horseback, no doubt heading to his club or place of business. She walked with purpose but without haste, observing the city she loved with fresh eyes. How different these streets appeared when one walked them as a person of modest means rather than riding in a ducal carriage with liveried footmen. Vendors called out their wares, children played in doorways, and working women hurried past with baskets and bundles. The walk from Pemberton House to Bond Street took nearly 40 minutes, and Catherine used this time to rehearse what she would say. She had visited Ashford & Sons once before, 2 years ago, with her father when he had commissioned a necklace for a diplomatic gift. She remembered Mr. Ashford as an obsequious man who had bowed and scraped before the Duke while treating his younger assistants with casual cruelty. As she turned onto Bond Street, Catherine marveled at the elegant shop fronts with their gleaming windows and polished brass fixtures. Ladies and gentlemen of fashion strolled leisurely, examining the displays of silks, books, and luxury goods. She felt suddenly conscious of her simple appearance, but reminded herself of her purpose. Ashford and Sons Fine Jewelers occupied a corner building with large windows that displayed an array of sparkling treasures. Catherine paused outside, studying the pieces and trying to estimate their prices. She hoped to find a simple but elegant brooch, or perhaps a modest pair of earrings that would serve as a meaningful wedding gift for Eleanor. Through the window, she could see Mr. Ashford himself, a portly man in his 50s with thinning hair and an elaborate waistcoat. He was attending to a well-dressed lady, his manner servile and attentive. Behind the counter stood a younger man, presumably his son or nephew, and near the door, a thin, sharp-featured woman who appeared to be assessing each person who entered. Catherine took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and approached the door. She had been raised to treat all people with courtesy and respect, and she expected the same in return. After all, she was a paying customer with legitimate business, regardless of her simple attire. The brass doorbell chimed softly as she entered, and Catherine found herself in an opulent interior of deep red carpeting, mahogany fixtures, and glittering displays. The scent of beeswax and rosewater filled the air, and everything spoke of luxury and refinement. The moment Catherine stepped across the threshold of Ashford and Sons, she became aware of 3 pairs of eyes, assessing her with undisguised skepticism. The thin woman by the door, who Catherine now recognized as Mrs. Ashford, looked her up and down with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to categorizing customers by their apparent worth. Mr. Ashford glanced up from his wealthy client, a duchess whose diamonds caught the light as she examined a sapphire necklace. His eyes lingered on Catherine for barely a moment before dismissing her as unworthy of immediate attention. The younger man behind the counter, whom Catherine assumed was the son, followed his father's lead and continued polishing an ornate silver tea service. Catherine stood patiently near the entrance, her hands folded before her, waiting to be acknowledged. She had been taught from childhood that good manners required one to wait one's turn, regardless of the circumstances. The Duchess continued her leisurely examination of jewelry, taking nearly 10 minutes to make her selections, while Catherine waited without complaint. Finally, Mrs. Ashford approached her, but not with the warm welcome Catherine had observed being given to other customers. The woman's smile was tight and forced, her tone distinctly cool. "Good morning," Mrs. Ashford said, the words clipped and perfunctory. "Are you perhaps looking for something specific? We do carry some less expensive items, though I should mention that our finest pieces require considerable investment." Catherine felt the subtle insult, but maintained her composure. "Good morning, madam. I am indeed looking for something specific. I wish to purchase a wedding gift for a dear friend. Perhaps you might show me some brooches or earrings suitable for a young bride." Mrs. Ashford's eyebrows rose slightly at Catherine's refined accent and proper grammar, which clearly contradicted her assumptions about the young woman's social status. However, rather than reassessing her approach, the jeweler's wife seemed to become more suspicious. "I see. And what price range were you considering?" The question was asked with barely concealed skepticism, as though Mrs. Ashford expected to hear an impossibly modest sum. "I have £23 available," Catherine replied honestly. "I hope that might be sufficient for something appropriate." The amount caused Mrs. Ashford to pause. It was not insignificant, particularly for someone dressed as Catherine was, but it was also far below the typical purchase price of their more fashionable clientele. Mrs. Ashford's expression suggested she was torn between the desire to make a sale and her inclination to dismiss what she clearly viewed as an inferior customer. £23, Mrs. Ashford repeated slowly. "Well, that is adequate for some of our simpler pieces. Though I must ask, miss, how did someone in your circumstances come by such a sum?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, and Catherine felt her cheeks flush with indignation. Catherine's composure wavered for just a moment at Mrs. Ashford's pointed question, but she quickly recovered, drawing upon years of training in diplomacy and social grace that she had received as a duke's daughter, though Mrs. Ashford could not know this. "I have been saving for some time," Catherine replied with quiet dignity. "The money comes from my personal allowance and the sale of some items that belonged to my late grandmother. I assure you, madam, every penny was honestly earned or rightfully mine." Mrs. Ashford's lips pursed in an expression of barely concealed disbelief. By now both Mr. Ashford and his son had finished with their distinguished customer and were observing the exchange with growing interest. The Duchess had departed with her purchases, leaving the shop temporarily free of other patrons. "Your grandmother's items, you say?" Mrs. Ashford's tone had grown even more skeptical. "How convenient. And I suppose you have documentation of these sales?" Catherine felt a chill run through her at the implication. "Madam, I am not certain I understand your meaning. I have come here as a legitimate customer, with legitimate funds, to make a legitimate purchase. Surely my money spends the same as anyone else's." Mr. Ashford now approached, his substantial form casting a shadow over Catherine. His manner, which had been so obsequious with the Duchess, was now coldly authoritative. "Young woman, you must understand our position. We are a reputable establishment serving London's finest families. We cannot simply accept the word of every person who walks through our door claiming to have money." "I am not claiming to have money," Catherine replied, her voice remaining steady despite her growing anger. "I do have money. I can show it to you if necessary." The younger Ashford, emboldened by his parents' behavior, stepped forward. "Father, perhaps we should summon a constable." "This person's story becomes more suspicious with each telling." Catherine stared at him in shock. "A constable? Sir, what crime do you imagine I have committed? I entered your establishment to make a purchase, nothing more." "The crime of wasting our time with false pretenses," Mrs. Ashford interjected sharply. "Look at yourself, girl. Your dress, while clean, is clearly not new. Your shoes show wear. Your hands, though you try to hide it, show the calluses of manual labor. Yet you claim to have £23 for a wedding gift." Each observation was delivered like a blow, and Catherine felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. These people were dissecting her appearance and drawing conclusions based purely on superficial details, never imagining that a duke's daughter might choose to live simply, or that she might work with her hands because she wished to understand the lives of others. "Madam," Catherine said, her voice now trembling slightly with suppressed emotion, "I did not realize that one's appearance determined the legitimacy of one's business in this establishment." Mr. Ashford's face had grown red with indignation. Whether genuine or performed for effect, Catherine could not determine. He drew himself up to his full height and looked down at her with unmistakable contempt. "Young woman, in 30 years of business, I have developed an eye for people. I can tell a lady from a pretender, a gentleman from a fraud. You, my dear, are neither lady nor honest customer. I suspect you are either a servant who has stolen from her employer, or perhaps something even less savory." The accusation hit Catherine like a physical blow. Never in her 18 years had anyone questioned her honesty or suggested she was capable of theft. Her father had raised her to value integrity above all else, and she had prided herself on her moral character. "Sir," she said, her voice now shaking with anger, "you go too far. I demand that you either serve me as a customer or allow me to leave with my dignity intact. I will not stand here and be insulted based on nothing more than your prejudices." Mrs. Ashford laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "Dignity? What dignity does a thief possess? James," she called to her son, "please watch the door while I send for the authorities. We cannot allow this person to leave until we have determined the source of her supposed funds." Catherine looked from one face to another, seeing nothing but suspicion and malice. These people had constructed an entire narrative about her based solely on her appearance, and no amount of reasonable discourse seemed capable of changing their minds. "I'm going to reach into my reticule now to show you my money," Catherine said slowly and clearly. "I hope you will not interpret this action as threatening." She carefully withdrew the small leather purse and opened it, revealing the neat stack of pound notes and pile of coins within. The money was real, substantial, and properly organized, not the chaotic collection one might expect from stolen funds. Mr. Ashford examined the money without touching it, as though it might contaminate him. "This proves nothing," he declared. "Thieves are often quite organized. The question remains, from whom did you steal this?" Catherine felt tears of frustration beginning to sting her eyes. "I stole it from no one. I am an honest person attempting to make an honest purchase. Why is this so difficult to believe?" "Because, my dear girl," Mrs. Ashford said with mock sympathy, "honest people in your circumstances do not possess such sums. Either you are lying about your circumstances, or you are lying about how you acquired the money. Either way, you are lying." The circular logic was maddening, And Catherine realized that nothing she could say would convince these people of her legitimacy. They had decided she was guilty of something and were determined to prove it, regardless of evidence to the contrary. Young James Ashford had positioned himself near the door, not quite blocking Catherine's exit, but making his intention clear. His presence there felt menacing, and Catherine began to understand that this situation was escalating beyond mere rudeness into something potentially dangerous to her reputation and freedom. "Father," James said, his voice carrying the excitement of someone who believed himself to be preventing a crime, "shall I fetch Constable Morrison from his usual post on Oxford Street? He knows us well and will take our word over that of this person." Catherine's mind raced. A public scene involving the constabulary would be disastrous, not only for herself, but potentially for her father and their family name. Even if the truth eventually came to light, the initial scandal would spread through London society like wildfire. The Duke's daughter accused of theft at a Bond Street jeweller. The gossips would feast on such a story for months. "Please," Catherine said, trying one more appeal to reason, "I understand that my appearance may not meet your expectations for your typical clientele, but surely you can see that I am well-spoken and educated. Does this not suggest that perhaps your assumptions about me are incorrect?" Mr. Ashford's expression grew even more stern. "On the contrary, my dear, your refined speech and education only make your circumstances more suspicious. Where would someone of your apparent means have acquired such polish? Either you are a servant who has been putting on airs above her station, or you are something worse, perhaps a confidence artist who uses false gentility to gain access to respectable homes." Catherine realized with growing horror that every positive quality she possessed was being twisted into evidence of criminal intent. Her education became proof of deception, her manners evidence of fraud, her money a sign of theft. Mrs. Ashford moved closer, studying Catherine's face with the intensity of someone examining a fascinating specimen. "You know, James, now that I look more closely, I believe I may have seen this face before. Was there not a description circulated last month of a young woman who had been dismissed from service in Grosvenor Square for theft?" Catherine gasped. "Madam, you are mistaken. I have never been employed in Grosvenor Square or anywhere else as a servant. You are confusing me with someone else entirely." "Am I?" Mrs. Ashford's smile was triumphant. "Or are you simply a very accomplished liar? James, I am now certain we should summon the constable immediately. This person is clearly not who or what she claims to be." Catherine felt trapped like a fox surrounded by hounds. Every word she spoke seemed to provide ammunition for their accusations, and remaining silent would be taken as an admission of guilt. Catherine stood in the center of the luxurious shop, surrounded by glittering displays of wealth and beauty, feeling more isolated and helpless than she had ever felt in her life. The three members of the Ashford family formed a semicircle around her, their faces showing a mixture of suspicion, triumph, and barely concealed excitement at having apparently caught a criminal in the act. "I think," Mr. Ashford announced with the air of someone delivering a final judgment, "that we have entertained this charade long enough. James, please secure the door. Mrs. Ashford, kindly prepare a written account of this person's behavior and claims for the constable." Catherine watched in growing panic as James moved to turn the key in the shop's front door, effectively trapping her inside. The click of the lock seemed unnaturally loud in the ornate interior, and Catherine felt her breathing become shallow and rapid. "Please," she said, her voice now clearly showing her distress. "You are making a terrible mistake. I am not a thief or a confidence artist. I am simply a young woman who wished to purchase a wedding gift for a friend. Surely this cannot warrant such extreme measures, Mrs. Ashford had moved behind the counter and was writing furiously with a steel pen, occasionally glancing up at Catherine as though memorizing details for her report. "Let me see," she muttered. Height approximately 5 feet and 4 inches, dark hair, brown eyes, well-spoken but clearly attempting to appear above her station. The description of herself as though she were a wanted criminal was perhaps the most surreal aspect of this entire nightmare. Catherine closed her eyes for a moment, trying to center herself and think clearly about her options. She could reveal her true identity, but doing so would require proof, and the only proof she carried was a letter from her father's secretary regarding estate business. Hardly conclusive evidence, and something these people would likely dismiss as another forgery or stolen item. She could attempt to leave, but James was guarding the door and would likely claim she was trying to escape justice. Her physical struggle would only make the situation worse and provide additional evidence of her supposed guilt. She could continue to protest her innocence, but this had proven ineffective and seemed only to make the Ashfords more convinced of her guilt. The situation appeared hopeless, and Catherine felt tears beginning to flow down her cheeks despite her efforts to maintain composure. She thought of her father, who had always taught her that truth and virtue would ultimately prevail, and wondered what he would advise in such circumstances. Just as Catherine felt her situation had become utterly desperate, the brass doorbell chimed unexpectedly. All 4 occupants of the shop turned toward the sound in surprise, given that James had locked the door only minutes earlier. In the doorway stood an elegant woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed in deep purple silk with a matching pelisse trimmed in ermine. Her grey hair was perfectly arranged beneath a fashionable bonnet, and her bearing suggested both wealth and authority. She carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to respect and deference. "Mr. Ashford," the woman said in a clear, cultured voice, "I do hope I am not interrupting anything important. Your door was locked, but I used the key you provided for your most valued customers." Catherine recognized her immediately, though she was careful not to show it. This was Lady Margaret Thornfield, one of her father's closest friends, and a frequent visitor to Pemberton House. Lady Margaret was known throughout London society for her sharp wit, unwavering principles, and fierce loyalty to those she cared about. Mr. Ashford immediately transformed from stern accuser to obsequious merchant, his entire demeanor changing as dramatically as if he had donned a mask. "Lady Thornfield, what an unexpected pleasure. Please forgive the locked door. We were just handling a small matter of shop security." Lady Margaret's keen eyes took in the scene. Catherine standing in the center of the room with tears on her cheeks, Mrs. Ashford behind the counter with a half-written report, and James positioned as though guarding the exit. Her expression grew thoughtful and then concerned. "I see," Lady Margaret said slowly. "And what sort of security matter requires locking a young lady inside your establishment? This seems rather unusual, even for these troubled times." Mrs. Ashford stepped forward eagerly, clearly hoping to justify their actions to such an important witness. "Oh, Lady Thornfield, you have arrived at a most fortuitous moment. We have caught a thief in the very act. This person," she gestured dismissively toward Catherine, "entered our shop claiming to have £23 for a purchase, but we quickly determined that the money must be stolen." Lady Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Indeed. And what evidence led you to this conclusion?" The question was asked mildly, but there was something in Lady Margaret's tone that should have warned the Ashfords to proceed carefully. Unfortunately, they were too excited by their supposed triumph to notice. "Well," Mr. Ashford began confidently, "one has only to look at her to see the truth. Her clothes, her appearance, her entire presentation screams of someone attempting to appear above her proper station." Lady Margaret walked slowly around Catherine, studying her with the same careful attention the Ashfords had shown, but with entirely different intent. Her examination was not seeking flaws to exploit, but rather seeking to understand the truth of the situation. "I see a young woman who is neatly dressed, well-groomed, and appears distressed," Lady Margaret observed. "Her speech, which I have now heard, is that of an educated person. Her posture and mannerisms suggest good breeding. Perhaps, Mr. Ashford, you might explain more precisely what has led you to such serious accusations." Catherine felt a surge of hope at having someone finally look at her with fairness rather than prejudice, but she remained silent, understanding that Lady Margaret was conducting her own investigation. Mr. Ashford, apparently believing he had found a sympathetic audience in this distinguished lady, launched into a detailed recounting of their suspicions. "Lady Thornfield, surely you understand that one develops an instinct for these things. This person claims to be purchasing a wedding gift, yet look at her shoes, worn, though clean. Notice her hands. I detected calluses, suggesting manual labor. Yet she produces £23 as though it were nothing." "How scandalous," Lady Margaret replied dryly. "A young woman with worn shoes and hands that suggests she is not afraid of honest work. Clearly this indicates the worst sort of criminal behavior." The sarcasm in Lady Margaret's voice was subtle, but unmistakable to anyone listening carefully. Unfortunately, the Ashfords were too caught up in their righteous indignation to detect it. Mrs. Ashford nodded vigorously. "Exactly. And when we questioned her about the source of her funds, her story kept changing. First she said it was savings, then she claimed it came from selling her grandmother's belongings. Most suspicious. I see, Lady Margaret said thoughtfully. And you found it impossible to believe that someone might both save money and sell inherited items to afford a gift for a friend. How imaginative of you. She turned to Catherine with a gentle smile. My dear, perhaps you would tell me about this wedding gift you wish to purchase. Who is the fortunate bride? Catherine found her voice, though it still trembled slightly. Miss Eleanor Hartwell, my lady. She is the daughter of Reverend Hartwell of St. Bartholomew's Parish. She is to marry Mr. Thomas Whitmore, the new curate, next month. I have been saving to purchase her something special for the occasion. Lady Margaret's expression brightened with genuine interest. Ah yes, Reverend Hartwell, a most worthy gentleman. I understand his daughter is quite accomplished and well regarded in the parish. You must be a close friend to be so generous. We became friends through our work with the Sunday school children, Catherine explained, feeling more confident as she spoke to someone who actually listened to her answers rather than twisting them into accusations. Lady Margaret nodded approvingly at Catherine's explanation, then turned back to the Ashford family with an expression that had grown notably cooler. So, let me ensure I understand correctly. This young lady entered your establishment as a legitimate customer, with legitimate funds, seeking to make a legitimate purchase for a friend's wedding gift, and your response was to accuse her of theft, lock her inside your shop, and prepare to summon the authorities. Mr. Ashford shifted uncomfortably, perhaps finally beginning to sense that Lady Margaret's sympathies did not lie where he had assumed. Well, when you put it that way, it sounds rather harsh, but surely you must understand our position, Lady Thornfield. We must protect our reputation and our clientele. Indeed, Lady Margaret replied, her voice growing distinctly frosty, and I am very interested in understanding exactly what reputation you believe you are protecting. Is it your reputation for treating customers with courtesy and respect, or perhaps your reputation for judging people by their character rather than their appearance? Mrs. Ashford, apparently still not grasping the direction of Lady Margaret's comments, stepped forward eagerly. Oh, Lady Thornfield, surely you see the necessity. People of our class must be cautious about the sort of individuals we allow into our establishments. Standards must be maintained. Standards, Lady Margaret repeated slowly. Yes, let us indeed discuss standards. Tell me, what standard of behavior have you demonstrated here today? The question hung in the air like a sword, and for the first time James Ashford looked uncertain. He glanced between his parents and Lady Margaret, clearly sensing that something had shifted in the conversation. Lady Margaret continued, her voice gaining strength and authority. I have witnessed the three of you verbally assault a young lady, based on nothing more than assumptions about her social status. I have seen you question her honesty without evidence, threaten her with false imprisonment, and generally behave in a manner that would be shameful in any civilized establishment. Catherine felt tears of relief beginning to replace her tears of distress. Finally, someone was speaking for her, someone whose voice carried weight and authority that even the Ashfords could not dismiss. But Lady Thornfield, Mrs. Ashford protested weakly, surely you can see that someone in her circumstances— Her circumstances, Lady Margaret interrupted sharply. And what exactly do you know of her circumstances? Have you asked about her family, her education, her background, or have you simply looked at her clothes and decided you know everything worth knowing? Mr. Ashford made one final attempt to justify their behavior. Lady Thornfield, with respect, one learns to recognize breeding and quality. This person, however well-spoken, clearly lacks the refinement of true gentility. It was, Catherine realized later, exactly the wrong thing to say to Lady Margaret at exactly the wrong moment. Lady Margaret's eyes flashed with a dangerous light that Catherine had seen before, usually just before her father's friend delivered one of her legendary verbal attacks on pompous fools and social pretenders. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Lady Margaret drew herself up to her full height. Refinement, she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. True gentility. How fascinating that you consider yourselves authorities on such subjects. Tell me, Mr. Ashford, what refinement is demonstrated by holding a customer prisoner in your shop? What gentility is shown by accusing someone of theft without evidence? The Ashford family stood frozen as Lady Margaret continued her assault. And you, Mrs. Ashford, what breeding is evidenced by your willingness to destroy a young woman's reputation based purely on your own prejudices? Is this the quality you speak of so confidently? Catherine watched in fascination as three people who had seemed so powerful and threatening just moments before were reduced to stammering, defensive shadows of themselves by Lady Margaret's withering critique. Furthermore, Lady Margaret continued, since you claim such expertise in recognizing true quality, perhaps you can explain how you failed to recognize it when it walked through your door this morning. Mr. Ashford looked confused. I beg your pardon, Lady Thornfield. This young lady, Lady Margaret said, placing a protective hand on Catherine's shoulder, whom you have spent the past hour insulting and threatening, happens to be Lady Catherine Pemberton, daughter of His Grace the Duke of Pemberton. The words fell into the ornate shop like stones thrown into still water, creating ripples of shock that seemed to reach every corner of the space. Catherine watched as the colour drained from three faces simultaneously. Mrs. Ashford's hand flew to her throat. That cannot be possible. Cannot be? Lady Margaret's voice dripped with disdain. Because she does not meet your narrow expectations of how a duke's daughter should appear. Because she chooses to live modestly and work with her hands. Because she saves her own money to buy gifts for friends, rather than simply demanding whatever she desires. James Ashford had gone so pale that Catherine worried he might faint. Father, he whispered, if she is truly— She is indeed, Lady Margaret confirmed, and I suspect His Grace will be most interested to learn how his daughter was treated in your establishment today. Mr. Ashford's legs seemed to give out, and he grasped the edge of the counter for support. The full magnitude of their error was beginning to dawn on all three family members, and their expressions showed growing horror as they realized the potential consequences of their actions. Catherine had remained largely silent during Lady Margaret's revelation and the immediate aftermath, but now she found her voice, strengthened by righteous indignation and the knowledge that her ordeal was finally nearing an end. Lady Margaret speaks truly, Catherine said, her voice clear and carrying the unmistakable authority of her breeding and position. I am indeed Lady Catherine Pemberton, daughter of the 7th Duke of Pemberton. She reached into her reticule and withdrew a letter bearing her father's official seal. This correspondence from my father's secretary should serve as proof, should you require it, though I suspect Lady Margaret's word carries sufficient weight. Mr. Ashford stared at the ducal seal with the expression of a man watching his own execution. Mrs. Ashford had begun to tremble visibly, and James looked as though he wished the floor would open and swallow him entirely. I choose to live simply, Catherine continued, not from necessity but from preference. I work with my hands because I believe in the dignity of labor. I save money for gifts because I believe in the value of personal sacrifice for those we care about. These choices, which you found so suspicious, actually reflect the values my father taught me. She paused, allowing her words to sink in fully before continuing. You assume that because I dress modestly and show the signs of honest work, I must be dishonest. You decided that because I do not flaunt wealth and status, I must lack them entirely. Your prejudices blinded you to the reality standing before you. Mrs. Ashford stepped forward, her hands clasped in supplication. Lady Catherine, please, we had no idea. If you had known, Catherine interrupted, you would have treated me with courtesy and respect. But what of the next young woman who enters your shop with modest dress and honest money? What of the servant girl who has saved for months to buy her sweetheart a small token? Will you treat her with the same contempt you showed me? The question struck at the heart of the matter, and Catherine could see in their faces that they understood the implications. Their behavior had not been an isolated incident of mistaken identity, but rather a revelation of their fundamental character and values. Lady Margaret nodded approvingly. An excellent point, Catherine. These people have shown their true nature today, and I suspect this is not the first time they have treated customers poorly based on superficial judgments. Mr. Ashford seemed to find his voice at last, though it came out as barely more than a croak. Your ladyship, please, we throw ourselves upon your mercy. We acted hastily, without thought. Without thought, Catherine repeated. Yes, that much is clear. Catherine looked around the shop that had been her prison for the past hour, seeing it now with different eyes. The luxury and elegance that had once impressed her now seemed tarnished by the ugly scene that had played out within these walls. Lady Margaret, she said thoughtfully, I find myself curious about the broader implications of what has occurred here today. If the Ashford family treats customers so poorly based on appearance alone, perhaps other aspects of their business practices warrant examination. Lady Margaret's smile was sharp and knowing. An astute observation, my dear. I wonder, for instance, about the quality of service provided to customers who cannot advocate for themselves as effectively as we can. Mr. Ashford's face, already pale, somehow managed to grow even whiter. Lady Thornfield, Lady Catherine, surely you cannot mean to suggest— I suggest nothing, Lady Margaret replied coolly. I merely observe that your behaviour today raises questions about your judgment and character that extend beyond this single incident. Catherine moved closer to the counter, studying the displayed jewellery with new interest. These pieces are quite beautiful, she remarked conversationally. I assume they are all genuine. Your authentication procedures must be quite thorough, given your claims about maintaining standards. The implication was subtle but unmistakable, and Mr. Ashford's hands began to shake as he realized that his treatment of Catherine might lead to a broader investigation of his business practices. Your ladyship, he stammered, I assure you that all our pieces are authentic and properly documented. We have served London's finest families for 3 decades without question or complaint. Without complaint that you are aware of, Catherine corrected gently. But then, if you treat customers as you treated me today, I suspect many complaints never reach your ears. After all, who would believe the word of a modestly dressed customer against that of a respected Bond Street establishment? Mrs. Ashford suddenly burst into tears, the full weight of their situation finally overwhelming her composure. We are ruined, she sobbed, completely ruined. Word of this will spread throughout society. No one will patronize our shop again. Lady Margaret observed the woman's distress with cool detachment. That, madam, will depend entirely upon how you choose to proceed from this moment forward. James Ashford, who had remained silent since the revelation of Catherine's identity, finally found his voice. What would your ladyship require of us to perhaps consider? To consider not destroying your business and reputation? Catherine finished his stammering question. An interesting inquiry, Mr. Ashford. Tell me, what do you believe would constitute appropriate reparations for the treatment I received today? The young man looked desperately at his parents, but found no guidance there. His father was slumped against the counter, and his mother continued to weep into her handkerchief. Perhaps a sincere apology, James suggested weakly. Catherine exchanged a meaningful glance with Lady Margaret. An apology would certainly be a beginning, but I find myself thinking of all the other customers who may have suffered similar treatment at your hands. What of them? She moved to examine a display of simpler pieces, rings and brooches that might appeal to customers of more modest means. This section here, do you keep these items readily available or must customers specifically request to see them? Mrs. Ashford looked up from her tears, confusion mixing with her distress. Those pieces are not often requested by our usual clientele. I see. So someone like myself, or rather someone who appeared to be like what you thought I was, would be discouraged from examining your finer pieces and directed to this corner instead. The silence that followed was answer enough. Catherine moved to the centre of the shop, her bearing now unmistakably that of nobility addressing subjects who had gravely erred. Lady Margaret stood beside her, providing silent but powerful support through her presence and obvious approval of Catherine's handling of the situation. I propose, Catherine began, her voice carrying the authority that came naturally to those born to command, a series of measures that will address both the immediate wrong done to me and the broader pattern of behaviour that this incident represents. The 3 members of the Ashford family looked up at her with expressions of desperate hope mixed with terror, understanding that their entire future might depend upon her next words. First, Catherine continued, you will provide written apologies, not only to me but to be posted prominently in your shop window, acknowledging that you misjudged a customer based solely on appearance and stating your commitment to treating all future customers with equal courtesy and respect. Mr. Ashford nodded eagerly. Yes, your ladyship, of course, whatever you require. Second, you will establish a policy of displaying your full range of merchandise to any customer who expresses interest, regardless of their apparent means. No customer should be prejudged or directed away from examining items they wish to see. Mrs. Ashford wiped her eyes and nodded. Yes, certainly. That is only fair. Third, you will donate a sum equivalent to 10% of your monthly profits for the next year to the St. Bartholomew's Parish Fund, which provides assistance to working families in need. This will help ensure that your prejudices against honest labourers are transformed into concrete support for them. The financial penalty made Mr. Ashford wince, but he nodded without protest, understanding that the alternative, complete social and business ruin, was far worse. Fourth, Catherine continued, you will hire at least one employee from a working-class background and ensure they are trained to provide the same courteous service you reserve for your wealthiest customers. This person will serve as a reminder that worth is not determined by birth or wealth. Lady Margaret smiled approvingly at this last condition. Excellent notion, Catherine. Nothing quite like practical experience to cure theoretical prejudices. James Ashford cleared his throat hesitantly. And if we agree to all these conditions, your ladyship would be willing to not speak of today's incident in society. Catherine considered the question carefully. I will not go out of my way to publicize what occurred here today, provided you fulfill these obligations faithfully. However, neither will I lie if directly asked about my experience at your establishment. Your future reputation will depend entirely upon your future behavior. With the terms of Catherine's mercy established and agreed upon, the atmosphere in the shop began to shift from one of crisis to one of cautious relief. However, Catherine had not forgotten her original purpose in entering Ashford & Sons. Now, she said with a slight smile, I believe we have some unfinished business. I came here to purchase a wedding gift, and that transaction remains incomplete. Mrs. Ashford immediately sprang into action. Her earlier contempt transformed into an almost desperate eagerness to please. Of course, your ladyship. Please, allow me to show you our finest pieces, perhaps something from our exclusive collection. Catherine raised a hand to stop her. Actually, Mrs. Ashford, I would prefer to see the items I originally requested, brooches and earrings suitable for a young bride, within the budget I mentioned. My circumstances have not changed simply because you now know my identity. The request clearly puzzled the jewelry merchant's wife, but she nodded and began bringing out various pieces from the moderate-priced section of their inventory. Each item she presented was accompanied by obsequious descriptions of its beauty and craftsmanship, a stark contrast to her earlier dismissive attitude. Catherine examined each piece carefully, but not with the eye of someone seeking the most expensive or elaborate item. Instead, she was looking for something that would suit Eleanor's personality and circumstances. Elegant, but not ostentatious, beautiful but practical enough for a curate's wife to wear regularly. This one, she said finally, selecting a delicate silver brooch shaped like a rose, set with a small but perfectly cut sapphire. This would suit her beautifully. The workmanship is excellent, and the design is both classic and personal. Mr. Ashford examined the price tag and looked surprised. But your ladyship, this piece costs only £18. Surely someone of your position would prefer something more substantial. Catherine's expression grew firm. Mr. Ashford, the value of a gift is not determined by its price, but by the thought and care behind it. This brooch is perfect for my friend, and that makes it worth far more than any amount of gold or jewels. Lady Margaret nodded approvingly. Quite right, my dear. True generosity lies in choosing what will bring joy to the recipient, not in displaying one's wealth. As Mrs. Ashford carefully wrapped the brooch in tissue paper and placed it in a small velvet-lined box, Catherine counted out £18 from her carefully saved funds. She handled the transaction with the same dignity she had shown throughout her ordeal, neither rushing to escape the shop nor lingering to savor her victory over her tormentors. I trust, she said as the purchase was completed, that this experience has been educational for all of us. As Catherine prepared to leave Ashford & Sons, she paused at the door and turned back to address the family one final time. Her manner was not gloating or cruel, but rather that of someone offering important wisdom to those who had shown they desperately needed it. I want you to remember something, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the ornate shop. Today, you nearly destroyed an innocent person's reputation and potentially your own business, all because you allowed prejudice to cloud your judgment. You assumed that appearance tells the whole story of a person's worth, character, and circumstances. Mr. Ashford, who had somewhat recovered his composure, nodded solemnly. Your ladyship, we have learned a profound lesson today. I assure you nothing like this will ever happen again in our establishment. See that it does not, Catherine replied. But more importantly, I hope you will extend this lesson beyond your business practices. Every person you encounter, whether in this shop, on the street, or in society, deserves to be treated with basic human dignity, until they prove themselves unworthy of it through their actions, not their appearance. Mrs. Ashford stepped forward, her earlier tears replaced by what appeared to be genuine remorse. Lady Catherine, might I ask, why did you choose to live so simply when you could have anything you desired? I confess, I do not understand. Catherine smiled, and for the first time since entering the shop, it was a warm, genuine expression. Because, Mrs. Ashford, having everything one desires often prevents one from appreciating anything one has. Living simply has taught me the value of small kindnesses, honest work, and genuine friendship. These lessons are worth more than all the luxury in England. Lady Margaret added her own observation. Catherine has learned what many people of wealth never discover, that true satisfaction comes not from what others can give you, but from what you can give to others. James Ashford, who'd been quietly contemplating the day's events, suddenly spoke up. Your Ladyship, might I ask what happened to the young woman who was supposedly dismissed from service in Grosvenor Square, the one my mother claimed to recognize? Catherine's expression grew serious. An excellent question, Mr. Ashford. I suspect that young woman, if she exists at all, was probably guilty of nothing more than trying to better herself or her circumstances. Your mother's willingness to make such an accusation without evidence troubles me greatly. Mrs. Ashford flushed deeply. I may have been mistaken about that. In the heat of the moment, I perhaps confused. You perhaps invented, Lady Margaret said coldly, which is precisely the sort of behavior that destroys innocent reputations and ruins lives. As Catherine and Lady Margaret finally prepared to leave the shop, Mr. Ashford made one last desperate attempt to minimize the potential damage to his reputation. Your Ladyship, he said, addressing Lady Margaret with renewed obsequiousness, I do hope that you will remember that this was all a most unfortunate misunderstanding. We are, as you know, respected members of the merchant community, and we have always striven to maintain the highest standards. Lady Margaret's eyebrows rose in an expression of polite incredulity. The highest standards, you say? I confess, Mr. Ashford, that I am now curious to learn what you consider to be low standards, if today's performance represents your finest work. Catherine placed a gentle but restraining hand on Lady Margaret's arm. While she appreciated her defender's sharp tongue, she had achieved what she came for and had no desire to continue the punishment unnecessarily. I believe, Catherine said diplomatically, that the Ashford family now understands the importance of treating all customers with respect and courtesy. I am confident that they will honor the agreements we have made today. As they finally stepped out onto Bond Street, Catherine felt the crisp autumn air fill her lungs and realized how oppressive the atmosphere inside the jewelry shop had become. The familiar sounds of London, horse hooves on cobblestones, vendors calling their wares, the general bustle of commerce and daily life, seemed like a symphony after the tension of the past hour. Lady Margaret linked arms with Catherine as they began walking toward Mayfair. My dear girl, she said with evident pride, you handled that situation with remarkable grace and wisdom. Your father would be extraordinarily proud of how you conducted yourself today. Catherine felt a warm glow of satisfaction, not from her victory over the Ashfords, but from the knowledge that she had remained true to her principles throughout the ordeal. I kept thinking of what Papa would advise in such circumstances. He always says that true nobility lies not in how one treats one's superiors, but in how one treats those who cannot help or harm you. Precisely, Lady Margaret agreed. And you demonstrated today that you have internalized that lesson completely. Lesser people would have revealed their identity immediately to escape the discomfort, or would have sought cruel revenge once the tables were turned. They walked in comfortable silence for several minutes, each lost in her own thoughts about the morning's extraordinary events. Finally, Catherine spoke again. Lady Margaret, I find myself wondering about something. How many other establishments in London treat customers as I was treated today? How many people suffer such indignities simply because they cannot fight back as effectively as I was able to do? Lady Margaret's expression grew thoughtful as she considered Catherine's question. I suspect, my dear, that what you experienced today is unfortunately far more common than those of us in privileged positions realize. Most people who are treated poorly in shops and businesses have no recourse and no voice. Catherine nodded, her mind already working on the implications. Then perhaps this incident, unpleasant as it was, could serve a larger purpose. If the merchant class knows that they might be serving nobility in disguise, might they not treat all customers more fairly? An intriguing notion, Lady Margaret mused. though I would prefer they treat people well because it is right, rather than because they fear consequences. As would I, Catherine agreed, but practical change often precedes moral change. If we can create a system where good behavior is rewarded and poor behavior is punished, eventually people may internalize better values. They had reached the corner of Berkeley Square, and Lady Margaret paused, studying Catherine with new interest. "You are considering some sort of broader campaign, are you not?" Catherine smiled, feeling more energized than she had all morning. "I am indeed. I think it might be beneficial to visit other establishments, dressmakers, booksellers, wine merchants, dressed as I am today, to see how widespread this problem truly is. And then we address it systematically. Good establishments deserve recognition and patronage. Poor ones deserve consequences and correction. We have the social position to make a real difference in how working people and those of modest means are treated throughout London." Lady Margaret's smile was delighted and slightly predatory. "Catherine Pemberton, I do believe you have inherited not only your father's principles, but also his strategic mind. This could be quite an undertaking. Will you help me?" Catherine asked. "Your reputation and connections would be invaluable in such an effort." "My dear girl," Lady Margaret replied, "nothing would give me greater pleasure. I have been looking for a worthy cause to occupy my time, and this is precisely the sort of practical reform that appeals to me." They resumed walking, both women now energized by the prospect of turning Catherine's unpleasant experience into something positive and meaningful. "We shall need to be systematic about it," Catherine mused. "Document everything, establish clear criteria for evaluation, and ensure that any consequences are fair and proportionate." "Indeed, and we must be careful not to become tyrants ourselves in our zeal for justice." 3 weeks later, Catherine stood in the modest parlour of the St. Bartholomew's Vicarage, watching her dear friend Eleanor Hartwell examine the silver rose brooch with tears of joy in her eyes. "Catherine," Eleanor breathed, "it is absolutely beautiful. But surely this must have been terribly expensive. You should not have spent so much on me." Catherine smiled, remembering the ordeal that had led to the purchase of this simple piece of jewellery. "The cost is not important, Eleanor. What matters is that it represents my affection for you and my wishes for your happiness in your marriage." Eleanor's father, Reverend Hartwell, observed the exchange with evident pleasure. "Lady Catherine has been most generous to our parish over these past months," he said warmly. "The donations from the Ashford family have allowed us to assist several families through difficult times." Catherine had not revealed to the vicar the true story behind the Ashfords' sudden generosity, allowing him to believe it was simply an outbreak of civic-mindedness among London's merchant class. She had, however, made it her business to ensure that the promised donations were indeed being made regularly and in full. Eleanor's mother fussed over the preparation of tea, clearly honoured to be hosting someone she believed to be a duke's daughter, making a condescending visit to their humble home. Catherine bore this treatment with good grace, though she privately reflected on how differently people behaved when they knew her true status versus when they believed her to be their social equal. "Have you given any thought to what you will wear for the ceremony?" Catherine asked Eleanor as they settled with their tea. Eleanor blushed slightly. "I have been making alterations to my mother's wedding dress. It is not the height of fashion, but it is meaningful to me, and Thomas assures me he will think me beautiful regardless." Catherine nodded approvingly. "A wise choice. The most beautiful bride is one who wears her happiness more prominently than her finery." As the afternoon progressed, Catherine found herself observing the Hartwell family with new appreciation. Their home was modest but spotlessly clean, their furnishings simple but well-maintained, and their manner with each other genuinely affectionate. There was something deeply satisfying about being welcomed here, not as a duke's daughter, but simply as Eleanor's friend. When it came time to leave, Eleanor walked Catherine to the door and took her hands warmly. "Thank you again for the beautiful brooch. I shall treasure it always, but more than that, I treasure your friendship. You have been such a blessing to our little parish community." Catherine squeezed her friend's hands in return. "The blessing has been entirely mine, Eleanor. Your friendship has taught me more about true wealth than any amount of gold or jewels ever could." That evening, Catherine returned to Pemberton House to find her father waiting for her in his private study. The Duke was seated behind his massive oak desk, but his expression was neither stern nor disapproving. Rather, it was one of curiosity, mixed with what appeared to be pride. "Catherine," he said as she entered, I understand you had quite an adventure on Bond Street some weeks ago. Catherine felt a moment of surprise, followed quickly by resignation. Of course, her father would have learned of the incident eventually. Very little that concerned his family escaped the Duke's attention for long. Lady Margaret told you, Catherine said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Among others, the Duke replied with a slight smile. It seems your handling of the situation has become something of a legend in certain circles. The story of the Duke's daughter who taught the Ashfords humility while maintaining her own dignity has been quite widely admired. Catherine felt herself blushing slightly. I hope I did not bring any embarrassment to our family name, Papa. Embarrassment? The Duke's eyebrows rose. My dear girl, you have brought nothing but honor to our name. I am extraordinarily proud of how you conducted yourself throughout that ordeal. He leaned back in his chair, studying his daughter with obvious affection. Tell me, Catherine, what did you learn from the experience? Catherine considered the question carefully. I learned that prejudice is often disguised as practicality, and that people will go to extraordinary lengths to justify their biases rather than question them. I also learned that having power means nothing unless one uses it responsibly. And what of your experiment in living simply? Do you feel it has achieved its purpose? Catherine nodded emphatically. It has taught me that true satisfaction comes from earning what one has, rather than simply possessing it. It has also shown me how differently people behave when they believe you cannot help or harm them. The Duke smiled warmly. Excellent lessons, both. And I understand you and Lady Margaret are planning to expand upon this experience. We are considering it, Catherine replied carefully. We believe there may be value in systematically examining how merchants and service providers treat customers of varying apparent means. A worthy endeavor, the Duke agreed, though I would caution you to be careful not to let righteousness become self-righteousness or justice become revenge. Catherine nodded solemnly. Lady Margaret has given me the same warning. We intend to be scrupulously fair in our evaluations and consequences. The Duke rose from behind his desk and moved to the window, gazing out at the London street beyond. Catherine, there is something else I wish to discuss with you. The Duke remained at the window for several moments, his hands clasped behind his back in the pose Catherine remembered from childhood when he was contemplating weighty matters. Your experience at the jewelry shop, he began finally, has confirmed something I have long suspected about your character. You possess not only the principles I hope to instill in you, but also the courage to act upon them, even when it would be easier to remain silent. Catherine felt a warm glow of pleasure at her father's approval, but remained silent, sensing that he had more to say. I have been giving considerable thought to your future, the Duke continued, turning back to face her. You are 18 now, of marriageable age, and I have received several inquiries from families seeking advantageous alliances. Catherine's heart sank slightly. She had known this conversation would come eventually, but she had hoped for more time to pursue her friendship with Eleanor and her reform projects with Lady Margaret. However, the Duke continued, noting her expression, your recent experiences have convinced me that you are not yet ready for the constraints of marriage and the management of another great household. You have important work to do first. Catherine looked up in surprise. Papa, I am formally appointing you as my representative for charitable works and social reform, the Duke announced. You will have an official budget and staff to support your efforts to improve conditions for working people and to address the sort of merchant prejudices you encountered. Catherine stared at her father in amazement. You are giving me an official position? Indeed, the position comes with a salary, which you will have earned through your own efforts rather than inherited through birth. It also comes with significant responsibility. You will be representing not only yourself, but our entire family in your interactions with merchants, charity organizations, and working families. The Duke returned to his desk and withdrew a folder of papers. Lady Margaret has agreed to serve as your senior advisor, and I have arranged for you to work with several established charitable organizations to ensure your efforts complement rather than duplicate existing work. Catherine felt tears of joy beginning to sting her eyes. This was more than she had ever dared hope for, not just her father's permission to continue her reform work, but his active support and recognition of it as important and valuable. There is one condition, the Duke added with a slight smile. You must promise me that you will not deliberately seek out dangerous situations. What happened at the jewelry shop was unpleasant, but ultimately harmless. I would not want your zeal for justice to lead you into genuinely perilous circumstances. Catherine nodded eagerly. "I promise, Papa. I have no desire to court danger for its own sake. I simply want to make a positive difference in people's lives." "Excellent. Then we are in agreement." 6 weeks later, Catherine stood in the small but beautifully decorated St. Bartholomew's Church, watching her dear friend Eleanor walk down the aisle toward her waiting bridegroom. The silver rose brooch gleamed against Eleanor's mother's carefully altered wedding dress, and the young bride's face glowed with happiness. Catherine had insisted on attending as simply Eleanor's friend rather than as the Duke's daughter, and she was seated among the other parish volunteers rather than in a place of honor. This arrangement pleased her greatly, as it allowed her to witness the ceremony without the distraction of special treatment or ceremony. Thomas Whitmore, the young curate, watched his approaching bride with an expression of such pure joy that Catherine felt her own eyes grow moist with sympathetic emotion. This was what marriage should be, she reflected, not a strategic alliance between families, but a union of two people who genuinely loved and respected each other. The ceremony was simple but deeply moving, with Reverend Hartwell officiating over his daughter's wedding with obvious pride and affection. Eleanor's vows, spoken in a clear, steady voice, promised not only love and fidelity, but also partnership in Thomas's ministerial work and service to their future parish. Following the ceremony, there was a modest reception in the church hall, with refreshments provided by the ladies of the parish. Catherine helped serve tea and cake, finding genuine pleasure in the simple tasks and warm conversations with people who knew her only as a friend and volunteer. "Catherine," Eleanor said, drawing her aside during a quiet moment, "I wanted to thank you again for everything you have done for Thomas and me, not just the beautiful brooch, but your friendship and support throughout our courtship." Catherine squeezed her friend's hands warmly. "Eleanor, your friendship has meant more to me than you could possibly know. You have shown me what it means to find contentment and purpose in simple things." Eleanor smiled radiantly. "I hope we will remain friends even as our circumstances change. Thomas and I will be moving to his new parish in Yorkshire next month, but I would be delighted to correspond with you regularly." "Nothing would give me greater pleasure," Catherine assured her, "and perhaps Thomas would not object to my visiting occasionally to see how you are settling into your new life." As the afternoon progressed, Catherine reflected on how much had changed since that unpleasant morning at the jewelry shop. She had not only survived an ordeal that could have been genuinely damaging, but had emerged from it with greater confidence in herself and clearer purpose for her future. The silver rose brooch had indeed been the perfect choice for Eleanor. Elegant enough for special occasions, but simple enough for everyday wear, meaningful but not ostentatious. It represented everything Catherine had hoped to achieve in her own approach to life. 3 months after Eleanor's wedding, Catherine stood in the elegant drawing room of Lady Margaret's Mayfair mansion, reviewing the results of their first systematic survey of London merchant establishments. The two women had developed a careful methodology for their investigations, visiting shops and businesses while dressed modestly and observing how they were treated compared to obviously wealthy customers. "The results are quite illuminating," Lady Margaret observed, examining their carefully compiled notes. "Of the 30 establishments we visited, 22 showed clear bias in their treatment of customers based on apparent wealth or social status." Catherine nodded grimly. "And several were far worse than the Ashfords ever were. At least they stopped short of physical intimidation." They had discovered that prejudicial treatment ranged from subtle discouragement, showing inferior merchandise first, quoting higher prices, or simply providing less attentive service, to outright rudeness and, in 2 cases, accusations of potential theft, similar to what Catherine had experienced. "I am particularly troubled by the pattern we observed at the dressmaking establishments," Catherine continued. "Working women who save money to purchase clothing for special occasions are consistently treated as though they are wasting the proprietor's time." Lady Margaret set down her papers and moved to the window, gazing out at the busy street below. "The question now becomes how to address these problems systematically and fairly. We cannot simply ruin every business that fails to meet our standards." Catherine had been giving this matter considerable thought. "I believe we need a combination of recognition for good behavior and consequences for poor behavior. Public praise for establishments that treat all customers well, and public censure for those that discriminate." "And how do you propose we make such recognition or censure effective?" Catherine smiled, the expression carrying a hint of her father's strategic mind. Through the power of London society, of course. If the fashionable world knows which establishments demonstrate proper values and which do not, market forces will do the rest. Lady Margaret turned back to her young partner with interest. Explain. We create a publication, perhaps a quarterly review, that evaluates merchant establishments on their treatment of customers across social boundaries. We distribute it to every household in Mayfair, Belgravia, and similar neighborhoods. People of quality will naturally prefer to patronize businesses that demonstrate quality in all their dealings. The idea was audacious but practical, and Lady Margaret's expression showed growing enthusiasm. It could work. Merchants depend heavily on the patronage of the wealthy, and few would risk losing that custom to maintain their prejudices. Catherine nodded eagerly. And we include positive recognition as well, highlighting establishments that provide excellent service to all customers. This way, we encourage good behavior rather than simply punishing bad behavior. You would need to be absolutely scrupulous about accuracy and fairness, Lady Margaret warned. One false accusation could destroy an innocent business and discredit our entire effort, which is why we must maintain detailed documentation of every interaction and have multiple witnesses whenever possible, Catherine replied. This cannot be about personal vendettas or subjective judgments. 6 months into their merchant evaluation project, Catherine received an unexpected visitor at Pemberton House. Mrs. Ashford stood in the grand foyer, clearly uncomfortable but determined, clutching a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Lady Catherine," she said, offering a curtsy that managed to be both respectful and awkward, "I hope you will forgive the presumption of my calling upon you directly." Catherine, intrigued by this development, invited Mrs. Ashford into a small receiving room and ordered tea. The jewellery merchant's wife perched nervously on the edge of an elegant chair, clearly overwhelmed by the grandeur of her surroundings. "Mrs. Ashford," Catherine said kindly, "what brings you to Pemberton House today?" "Your ladyship, I wanted to thank you personally for the changes you have brought to our establishment and our lives." Mrs. Ashford's voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "When you imposed those conditions upon us 6 months ago, I thought you were simply punishing us cruelly for our mistakes." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "And now? Now I understand that you were offering us an opportunity to become better people," Mrs. Ashford replied. "The young woman we hired from the working class, Mary Patterson, has proven to be one of our most valuable employees. She understands our customers in ways we never did, and she has taught us so much about treating everyone with genuine respect." Catherine felt a warm glow of satisfaction. "I am delighted to hear that, Mrs. Ashford. And how has business been affected by these changes?" Mrs. Ashford's face brightened considerably. "Better than ever, your ladyship. Word has spread that we treat all customers fairly, and we have gained many new clients who had never felt welcome in our shop before. Our profits have actually increased since we began following your guidance." This was exactly what Catherine had hoped would happen, that good behavior would prove more profitable than prejudice, creating a natural incentive for merchants to maintain high standards. "I brought you something," Mrs. Ashford continued, offering the brown paper package with slightly trembling hands. "It is not valuable, but I made it myself as a token of my gratitude." Catherine unwrapped the package to reveal a small sampler embroidered with careful stitches. True wealth lies in character, not in coin. The workmanship was simple but sincere, and Catherine was genuinely touched by the gesture. "Mrs. Ashford, this is lovely. Thank you for thinking of me. Your ladyship, might I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you show us mercy when you could have destroyed us completely? We treated you abominably, yet you gave us a chance to redeem ourselves, rather than simply ruining our business." Catherine considered the question carefully. "Because, Mrs. Ashford, I believe that people can change when they are given proper motivation and opportunity. Destroying you would have accomplished nothing positive. Helping you become better people benefits everyone." As Catherine's merchant evaluation project gained momentum and recognition throughout London society, she began to receive visitors from unexpected quarters. On a particularly busy Thursday afternoon, she found herself meeting with a delegation of working women who had heard about her efforts to improve customer treatment. "Lady Catherine," said their spokesperson, a well-dressed but clearly hard-working woman in her 30s, "we have come to thank you for what you are doing. For years we have been made to feel unwelcome in many establishments, even when we had saved money specifically for purchases there." Catherine listened with interest as the women shared their experiences. Seamstresses who were treated rudely when shopping for fabric for their own families, domestic servants who were ignored or insulted when attempting to purchase gifts, and working mothers who were made to feel ashamed of their modest circumstances while buying necessities for their children. "What we appreciate most," another woman added, "is that you have not simply demanded change but have created a system that rewards good behavior. Several establishments have already improved their treatment of customers like us because they want to be included in your positive reviews." This was precisely the outcome Catherine had hoped for, but hearing it confirmed by the people most affected by these changes was deeply satisfying. "Have you noticed any resistance or backlash from merchants who resent being evaluated?" Catherine asked. The first woman nodded. "Some, certainly. There are still establishments where we are treated poorly, and a few proprietors have become even more hostile, as though they are defying your project out of spite." Catherine made note of this concern. She and Lady Margaret had anticipated that some merchants might react negatively to having their behavior scrutinized and judged, but she had hoped that market pressures would eventually overcome such resistance. "We have also heard," the second woman continued, "that you are planning to expand your project beyond London. Is this true?" Catherine smiled. "Lady Margaret and I are indeed considering how to extend our evaluation system to other cities and towns. The principles of fair customer treatment should not be limited to the capital." The women exchanged excited glances. Many of them had family and friends in provincial towns where merchant prejudice was often even worse than in London, since there were fewer wealthy customers to provide economic incentives for good behavior. "If you do expand the project," the spokesperson said, "we would like to volunteer our assistance. We travel throughout England in our work, and we could observe and report on merchant behavior in places you might not be able to visit personally." The offer intrigued Catherine. Having a network of observers from working-class backgrounds would provide invaluable insight into customer treatment patterns across different regions and social situations. That is a generous offer, and one that Lady Margaret and I would certainly consider. Perhaps we could arrange a more formal meeting to discuss how such collaboration might work. Nearly a year after the incident at Ashford and Sons, Catherine sat across from her father in his study, providing him with a comprehensive report on her reform activities. The Duke listened attentively as she described the merchant evaluation project, the improvements they had documented, and the expansion plans she and Lady Margaret were developing. "The results have exceeded our most optimistic expectations, Papa," Catherine concluded. "We have documented measurable improvements in customer treatment at over 60 establishments, and our publication now reaches nearly every household of quality in London." The Duke leaned back in his chair, studying his daughter with evident pride and consideration. "Catherine, your achievements have been remarkable. You have created a system that not only addresses immediate injustices, but provides ongoing incentives for better behavior." He paused, then continued with a more serious expression. "However, I have some concerns about the scope and intensity of your crusade. Several influential merchants have approached me privately, expressing frustration with what they see as excessive scrutiny of their business practices." Catherine felt a flicker of defensiveness, but kept her voice steady. "Papa, surely the inconvenience to merchants is less important than the dignity of their customers." "Of course it is," the Duke replied, "but you must understand that creating enemies unnecessarily can undermine your broader goals. Some of these merchants are genuinely trying to improve, but feel that your standards are impossibly high or arbitrarily applied." Catherine considered this feedback carefully. She had been so focused on achieving justice for mistreated customers that she might not have given sufficient consideration to the practical challenges facing merchants attempting to change long-established practices. "What would you advise, Papa?" "Perhaps it is time to shift your approach slightly," the Duke suggested. "Rather than simply evaluating and judging, consider creating more opportunities for education and positive reinforcement. Help merchants understand not just what they should do differently, but how to implement those changes practically." The suggestion made sense, and Catherine realized that her father was offering wisdom gained from years of managing complex political and business relationships. "You mean something like training programs or workshops?" "Exactly, and perhaps a system of graduated recognition rather than simple pass or fail evaluations. Acknowledge merchants who are making genuine efforts to improve, even if they have not yet achieved perfection." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. That could be much more effective than our current approach. People respond better to encouragement than to criticism, even when the criticism is deserved. Indeed, and Catherine, there is something else I wanted to discuss with you. The Duke's tone became more formal, and Catherine sensed that he was shifting to a different topic entirely. Your work over the past year has demonstrated that you possess not only strong principles, but also the practical skills necessary to implement social reform effectively. These qualities, combined with your education and social position, suggest that you might be ready for greater responsibilities. Catherine looked at her father with curious anticipation. I'm considering appointing you as my official representative to the House of Lords for matters relating to social welfare and commercial regulation. It would be an unprecedented appointment for someone of your age and gender, but your demonstrated competence argues for exceptional measures. Catherine stared at her father in amazement. The House of Lords was the pinnacle of political power in England, and the idea that she might have an official role there was both thrilling and terrifying. Papa, surely the other peers would never accept such an arrangement. A woman, even a duke's daughter, having formal influence in parliamentary matters. The Duke smiled. Catherine, you underestimate both your own accomplishments and the progressive thinking of some of my colleagues. Lord Whitmore has been particularly impressed by your merchant evaluation project. Apparently, his nephew Thomas speaks very highly of your character and judgment. Catherine realized he was referring to Eleanor's husband and felt a warm glow of satisfaction that her friendship with the young curate and his wife had created this unexpected connection. Several peers have daughters of their own, the Duke continued, and they have observed how your approach to social reform achieves practical results without revolutionary upheaval. They see you as someone who can bridge the gap between noble intentions and effective action. Catherine felt her heart racing with excitement and apprehension. What would such a position entail? You would advise me on legislation affecting working people, commercial practices, and social welfare. You would also have the authority to investigate conditions and practices throughout England, with government backing for your recommendations. The scope of the opportunity was staggering. Instead of being limited to London merchants and voluntary cooperation, Catherine could potentially influence national policy and create systematic change across the entire kingdom. There would be significant challenges, the Duke warned. Many people would resent your authority and question your qualifications. You would face constant scrutiny and criticism, and any mistakes would be magnified and publicized by your opponents. Catherine nodded soberly. I understand, Papa. But surely the potential to help people on a much larger scale outweighs the personal difficulties. That is for you to decide, my dear. I will not pressure you to accept this appointment if you feel unprepared for its demands. Catherine stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the London streets where so many people lived and worked under conditions that could be improved with proper policies and enforcement. The incident at the jewelry shop had opened her eyes to problems she had never fully understood, and the subsequent year of reform work had shown her both how much needed to be changed and how effectively change could be achieved with the right approach. I would like to accept the appointment, Papa, but with one condition. What condition? That Lady Margaret be appointed as my official deputy and advisor. Her experience and wisdom have been invaluable to our work, and I would not want to proceed without her continued partnership. The Duke smiled broadly. I had hoped you would make exactly that request. Lady Margaret has already agreed to serve in such a capacity, should you accept the appointment. 2 years after her humiliating experience at Ashford & Sons, Catherine found herself standing once again before the familiar windows of the jewelry shop, but this time she was accompanied by a small entourage of parliamentary clerks and government observers. She wore elegant but practical clothing that clearly identified her as a person of importance, and her manner carried the confidence that came from proven success in her reform efforts. Mr. Ashford emerged from his shop the moment he recognized her, his face beaming with genuine pleasure and pride. The transformation in his demeanor from their first meeting was remarkable. Where once he had been suspicious and condescending, he now radiated warmth and respect for all potential customers. Lady Catherine, he exclaimed, offering a deep bow that managed to be respectful without being servile. What an honor to see you again. Please allow me to show you the improvements we have made to our establishment. Catherine entered the shop that had once been the scene of her greatest humiliation, now serving as a model of progressive customer service practices. The interior had been redesigned to display merchandise more democratically, with fine pieces visible and accessible to all customers, rather than hidden away for the exclusive viewing of obviously wealthy patrons. Behind the counter stood Mary Patterson, the working-class young woman whose hiring had been one of Catherine's original conditions. Mary had clearly thrived in her position, and her presence served as both a practical improvement to customer service and a symbolic reminder of the shop's commitment to treating all people fairly. "Lady Catherine," Mary said with a warm smile, "it is wonderful to see you again. Mrs. Ashford has often spoken of how your guidance transformed not just our business practices, but our understanding of what it means to serve others with dignity." Catherine was genuinely moved by the changes she observed. This was exactly what she had hoped to achieve, not just compliance with her demands, but a fundamental shift in attitude and approach that made good customer service a natural expression of the proprietor's values, rather than a reluctant concession to external pressure. "Mr. Ashford," Catherine said, "I understand that your shop has become something of a model for other establishments throughout London. How has this transformation affected your business?" Mr. Ashford's pride was evident as he replied, "Lady Catherine, our revenues have increased by nearly 40% since we implemented your recommendations. More importantly, we have gained the respect and loyalty of customers from all walks of life. We now serve working families, middle-class professionals, and nobility with equal care and attention." Catherine nodded approvingly. "And have you found it difficult to maintain these standards consistently?" "Quite the contrary," Mrs. Ashford interjected, joining the conversation. "Once we truly understood that excellent customer service benefits everyone involved, it became natural to treat each person who enters our shop as a valued individual deserving of our best efforts." As Catherine's government-backed reform initiative entered its second year, the results exceeded even her most optimistic projections. The systematic evaluation and recognition program had been expanded to cover over 300 establishments across England, with documented improvements in customer treatment at nearly 80% of participating businesses. Standing in the House of Lords as her father's official representative, Catherine presented her annual report to an assembly of peers who had initially been skeptical of her appointment, but had become increasingly supportive as her results spoke for themselves. "My lords," Catherine began, her voice carrying clearly through the ornate chamber, "the evidence demonstrates conclusively that fair customer treatment is not only morally imperative, but economically beneficial. Establishments that treat all customers with equal respect and courtesy show consistent improvements in revenue, customer loyalty, and public reputation." Lord Pembroke, one of the more conservative peers, raised a question that Catherine had expected. "Lady Catherine, while your results are impressive, some argue that your methods constitute excessive government interference in private business affairs. How do you respond to such criticism?" Catherine had prepared carefully for this objection. "My Lord Pembroke, our approach relies entirely on voluntary participation and market-based incentives. We compel no merchant to change their practices, but we do provide information that allows customers to make informed choices about where to spend their money." She gestured to the detailed charts and statistics displayed for the Assembly's review. "The improvements we document result from merchants' own recognition that good customer service serves their interests, as well as their customers' dignity." Lady Margaret, seated in the gallery reserved for official advisers, nodded approvingly at Catherine's response. They had worked together to develop arguments that appealed to both moral principles and practical considerations, understanding that lasting change required broad political support. Lord Whitmore, Eleanor's father-in-law and one of Catherine's strongest supporters, rose to speak. "Lady Catherine, beyond the immediate improvements in merchant behaviour, have you observed any broader social effects from your reform efforts?" Catherine's face lit up with enthusiasm for this question. "Indeed, my Lord Whitmore, we have documented increased civic engagement among working-class citizens who report feeling more valued and respected as members of society. Additionally, several establishments have voluntarily expanded their hiring practices to include more workers from diverse backgrounds, recognizing that such employees bring valuable perspectives to customer service." The response murmured through the chamber suggested that many peers found these broader social benefits particularly compelling. Catherine had learned that aristocratic support for reform often depended on demonstrating that changes would strengthen rather than threaten the existing social order. Furthermore, Catherine continued, we have received requests from local authorities in Scotland and Ireland to extend our evaluation system to their regions, suggesting that the principles we have developed have application throughout the United Kingdom. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Catherine received an unexpected but delightful visitor at Pemberton House. Eleanor Whitmore, formerly Hartwell, had returned to London for a brief visit and had requested a meeting with her dear friend. Catherine found Eleanor in the morning room, looking radiant and content, despite the obvious signs of travel and fatigue. Marriage and provincial life had clearly agreed with Eleanor, who seemed more confident and mature than when Catherine had last seen her. "Eleanor," Catherine exclaimed, embracing her friend warmly. "How wonderful to see you. How are you finding married life in your new parish?" Eleanor's smile was radiant as she replied, "Catherine, I am happier than I ever imagined possible. Thomas is not only a wonderful husband, but also a dedicated minister, and I have found great fulfillment in supporting his work and serving our parishioners." They settled comfortably with tea, and Catherine was struck by how natural and easy their friendship remained, despite the dramatic changes in both their circumstances over the past 2 years. "I must tell you," Eleanor continued, "that your silver rose brooch has become something of a legend in our parish. When people learn that it was a gift from the famous Lady Catherine Pemberton, they are amazed that someone of your prominence would choose such a personal and thoughtful present." Catherine laughed. "I hope you tell them that I chose it because it was perfect for you, not because of its monetary value." "Of course I do," Eleanor replied, "and that lesson has actually become part of Thomas's sermons about finding true worth in character rather than material possessions." Catherine was delighted to learn that her simple gift had found such meaningful application. "Eleanor, I must ask, have you encountered any of the merchant prejudice in Yorkshire that we work to address here in London?" Eleanor's expression grew more serious. "Unfortunately, yes. The problems you identified are perhaps even worse in smaller towns, where there are fewer wealthy customers to provide economic incentives for good behavior." Catherine leaned forward with interest. This confirmed what she and Lady Margaret had suspected about the need to expand their reform efforts beyond London. "However," Eleanor continued, "word of your work has reached even our remote parish. Several local merchants have heard about the London evaluation system and have begun improving their customer service in hopes of receiving similar recognition." "That is encouraging news indeed," Catherine replied. "Lady Margaret and I have been discussing ways to extend our work to provincial areas, but we have been concerned about the practical challenges of monitoring establishments across such distances." Eleanor's eyes brightened. "Catherine, might I make a suggestion?" Eleanor's suggestion proved to be both practical and inspired. "Thomas and I correspond regularly with clergy throughout northern England," she explained. "Ministers and their wives are in unique positions to observe how merchants treat customers from all social classes, since we interact with everyone from the wealthiest landowners to the poorest labourers." Catherine immediately grasped the potential of this network. "You are suggesting that clergy could serve as observers and evaluators for our reform programme?" "Exactly," Eleanor replied enthusiastically. "We are trusted by people across social boundaries. We have strong incentives to promote just treatment of all individuals, and we are already organised into networks that cover the entire country." The idea was brilliant in its simplicity and scope. Catherine realised that Eleanor had identified a solution to one of the most significant challenges facing their reform efforts: how to monitor and influence merchant behaviour across the vast expanse of England without requiring impossible amounts of travel and direct supervision. "Eleanor, would Thomas be willing to discuss this possibility with his fellow clergy? If we could establish a network of clerical observers, we could create a national system of merchant evaluation and recognition." Eleanor nodded eagerly. "I am certain he would be delighted to participate. Thomas has often expressed frustration about how some merchants in our area treat working families with disrespect, and he would welcome an opportunity to address such behaviour constructively." Catherine's mind was already racing with the possibilities. A network of clergy observers would provide several advantages over their current system: broader geographic coverage, trusted local knowledge, moral authority that merchants would respect, and existing organizational structures that could support systematic evaluation and reporting. "We would need to develop training materials," Catherine mused, "to ensure that evaluations are conducted fairly and consistently across different regions and observers." And perhaps, Eleanor added, we could create a system of recognition that acknowledges not just individual establishments, but entire communities that demonstrate commitment to fair treatment of all residents. Catherine looked at her friend with renewed admiration. Eleanor's experiences as a minister's wife had clearly given her valuable insights into community dynamics and social reform that complemented Catherine's more aristocratic perspective. Eleanor, would you be willing to serve as our coordinator for clerical participation in the reform program? You understand both our methods and the needs and concerns of provincial clergy. Eleanor's face glowed with excitement. Catherine, nothing would give me greater pleasure than to contribute meaningfully to your important work. 6 months after Eleanor's visit, Catherine stood before the largest assembly of clergy ever gathered in Westminster Abbey. Representatives from parishes throughout England, Scotland, and Wales had come to London to learn about the Merchant Evaluation Programme and consider participating in its national expansion. The Archbishop of Canterbury himself had endorsed the initiative, recognizing it as a practical application of Christian principles of justice and human dignity. His support had been crucial in convincing conservative clergy that the program represented moral reform rather than radical social change. Reverend gentlemen, Catherine began, addressing the assembly with the confidence born of 2 years of successful reform work. You serve communities where every person, regardless of their station in life, deserves to be treated with courtesy and respect. Our Merchant Evaluation Program provides you with tools to encourage and recognize such treatment in practical, measurable ways. She gestured to Lady Margaret, who rose to present the detailed methodology they had developed for clerical observers. The system was designed to be simple enough for busy ministers to implement alongside their regular duties, yet comprehensive enough to provide meaningful evaluation of merchant behavior. Eleanor, now serving as the official coordinator for clerical participation, addressed specific concerns that had emerged during preliminary discussions with interested clergy. The program does not require you to become investigators or enforcers, Eleanor explained. Rather, you serve as witnesses to community standards and advocates for Christian treatment of all people. The recognition and consequences flow naturally from the information you provide. Reverend Dr. Matthews from Manchester raised a question that Catherine had anticipated. Lady Catherine, how do we address merchants who might retaliate against clergy who evaluate their practices unfavorably? Catherine's response reflected careful consideration of this legitimate concern. Dr. Matthews, our experience in London suggests that merchants rarely retaliate against fair evaluation, particularly when it comes from respected community leaders like yourselves. Moreover, the program's emphasis on recognizing good behavior provides positive incentives that typically outweigh any defensive reactions. She paused, then continued with greater emphasis. However, should any merchant attempt to intimidate or retaliate against participating clergy, they would face immediate government investigation and potential prosecution. We will not tolerate threats against those who serve the cause of justice. The Assembly's response was overwhelmingly positive, with over 200 clergy volunteering to participate in the initial phase of national expansion. Catherine felt a deep sense of satisfaction as she realized that her humiliating experience at the jewelry shop was about to generate systemic change throughout the United Kingdom. Thomas Whitmore, Eleanor's husband, approached Catherine after the formal session concluded. Lady Catherine, Eleanor and I wanted to thank you personally for creating this opportunity for meaningful service. We have long wished to address merchant prejudice in our community, but lacked effective means to do so. The opportunity is mutual, Reverend Whitmore, Catherine replied warmly. Your network of dedicated observers will make possible reforms that Lady Margaret and I could never achieve working alone. 1 year after the national expansion of the Merchant Evaluation Program, Catherine reviewed the comprehensive results in her new government office overlooking Whitehall. The scope of documented improvement was remarkable. Over 1,500 establishments across the United Kingdom had voluntarily modified their customer service practices, with measurable improvements in treatment of working-class customers at nearly 90% of participating businesses. Lady Margaret entered the office, carrying additional reports from their newest regional coordinators. Catherine, the results from Scotland are particularly encouraging. The Presbyterian ministers there have embraced the program with exceptional enthusiasm, and we are seeing improvements in merchant behavior even in remote Highland communities. Catherine smiled as she examined the Scottish reports. I suspect that Presbyterian emphasis on human dignity and social justice makes our program particularly appealing to Scottish clergy. The success metrics went beyond simple compliance with evaluation criteria. They had documented increased customer satisfaction across social classes, improved economic performance at participating establishments, and enhanced community cohesion in towns where merchants treated all residents with equal respect. Perhaps most significantly, Catherine observed, reviewing a report from Eleanor in Yorkshire, we are seeing evidence that improved merchant behavior is influencing broader social attitudes. When working people are treated with dignity in commercial settings, they report feeling more confident and respected in other aspects of community life. Lady Margaret nodded approvingly. That suggests that our program is achieving its deepest purpose, not just changing specific behaviors, but contributing to a more just and respectful society overall. A knock at the office door interrupted their review. Catherine's secretary announced that a delegation of merchants from Birmingham requested an audience to discuss establishing voluntary customer service standards for their city's commercial district. "Send them in," Catherine replied, exchanging a meaningful glance with Lady Margaret. This was exactly the kind of proactive engagement they had hoped to inspire, merchants taking initiative to improve their practices rather than simply responding to external evaluation. The Birmingham delegation, led by a prominent textile merchant named Mr. Harrison, presented an impressive proposal for self-regulation based on the principles Catherine had developed. Their plan included regular training for customer service staff, clear standards for treatment of all customers, regardless of apparent means, and a voluntary monitoring system administered by local business leaders. "Lady Catherine," Mr. Harrison explained, "we have observed the success of establishments that participate in your evaluation program, and we want to achieve similar results throughout our commercial district. Rather than waiting for external evaluation, we prefer to establish high standards proactively." Catherine was impressed by both the substance and the spirit of their proposal. "Mr. Harrison, your initiative demonstrates exactly the kind of leadership we hope to inspire. A voluntary commitment to excellent customer service benefits everyone involved." As Catherine's reform work entered its fourth year, she found herself reflecting on the unexpected journey that had begun with her humiliation at Ashford and Sons. What had started as a simple desire to purchase a wedding gift for a friend had evolved into a national movement for social justice and commercial reform. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Catherine sat in the garden of Pemberton House reading letters from clergy and merchants throughout the United Kingdom who had participated in her program. Their accounts of transformed communities and improved relationships between social classes filled her with deep satisfaction. Eleanor's latest letter from Yorkshire was particularly moving. She described how the merchant evaluation program had helped heal long-standing tensions between working families and local shopkeepers, creating a more harmonious and prosperous community for everyone. Her father joined her in the garden, carrying his own correspondence from fellow peers who had observed the success of Catherine's work with growing admiration and support. "Catherine," the Duke said, settling into a chair beside her, "I have received a most interesting communication from the Prime Minister. He wishes to discuss expanding your merchant evaluation program to include government contractors and suppliers." Catherine looked up with interest. "That would be a significant expansion of scope, Papa. Government contracting involves much larger sums of money and more complex relationships than retail customer service." "Indeed," the Duke agreed, "but the principles remain the same. Treating all people with dignity and respect, maintaining high standards of service, and creating incentives for excellent behavior rather than simply punishing poor performance." Catherine considered the implications. Government contracting reform could affect thousands of workers and potentially save substantial public funds while improving service quality. "I would be interested in such a discussion," Catherine replied. "However, I would want to ensure that we maintain our focus on practical results rather than bureaucratic procedures." The Duke smiled proudly at his daughter's response. "I believe that focus on practical results is precisely what has made your current program so successful. You have demonstrated that idealistic principles can achieve measurable improvements when implemented thoughtfully and consistently." Catherine folded Eleanor's letter carefully, thinking about how much had changed since she had walked into that jewelry shop 4 years ago as an uncertain young woman hoping to buy a simple gift for her friend. "Papa, do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had revealed my identity immediately when the Ashfords began treating me poorly?" The Duke considered her question thoughtfully. "I suspect you would have received an apology and proper service, but you never would have understood the broader problem or developed the motivation to address it systematically." Catherine nodded. "Sometimes the most valuable experiences are the most difficult ones, because they force us to see problems we might otherwise ignore." 5 years after her transformative encounter at Ashford and Sons, Catherine stood before the House of Lords, delivering her final report as official representative for social welfare and commercial regulation. At 23, she had achieved more meaningful reform than many politicians accomplished in entire careers, but she was ready to transition to new challenges and responsibilities. "My lords," Catherine began, her voice carrying the authority and confidence that came from proven success, "the Merchant Evaluation Program has demonstrated conclusively that systematic reform, based on clear principles and practical incentives, can achieve lasting improvements in social justice without disrupting economic prosperity." The statistics she presented were impressive. Over 3,000 establishments participating voluntarily in the program documented improvements in customer treatment at 92% of evaluated businesses and measurable increases in economic activity in communities where merchants adopted fair service standards. "More importantly," Catherine continued, "we have established networks and procedures that will sustain these improvements long after formal government involvement ends. Local communities now possess the tools and knowledge necessary to maintain high standards of commercial behavior independently." Lord Pembroke, who had initially opposed Catherine's appointment, rose to speak. "Lady Catherine, this assembly owes you a debt of gratitude for demonstrating that principled reform can achieve practical results. Your work has enhanced both social justice and commercial prosperity throughout the United Kingdom." After the formal session concluded, Catherine met privately with Lady Margaret to discuss their future plans. Both women had decided to step back from direct involvement in the Merchant Evaluation Program, confident that it had achieved sufficient momentum and institutional support to continue without their daily oversight. "Catherine," Lady Margaret said, "you have accomplished something remarkable. You have created lasting change that will benefit countless people for generations to come." That jewelry shop incident, painful as it was, ultimately became the catalyst for one of the most successful social reform movements in recent memory. Catherine smiled, thinking of all the people whose lives had been improved by their work. Working families who now shopped with dignity, merchants who had discovered that good customer service enhanced their prosperity, and communities that had become more harmonious and just. "Lady Margaret, I could never have achieved any of this without your partnership and guidance. Together we have proven that two determined women can change society for the better, even when starting from a position of apparent powerlessness." As Catherine prepared to leave the House of Lords for the final time as an official representative, she carried with her a letter from Eleanor describing the latest improvements in Yorkshire merchant behaviour and expressing gratitude for the programme that had strengthened her entire community. The silver rose brooch that had started this entire journey continued to shine on Eleanor's dress each Sunday, a small but meaningful symbol of friendship, sacrifice, and the power of treating all people with dignity and respect. Catherine's legacy was secure. She had transformed personal humiliation into systematic reform, proving that individual courage and principled action could indeed change the world, one merchant and one customer at a time.